first connected with Q in Maine, and didn't really get a chance to get to know him till after that, but we got to know each other over many lives, and he's an incredibly talented dude who's incredibly passionate, and I'm so excited that he can be here speaking today, and I think it was meant to be, so pick this guy's brain, learn from this guy. This guy's a G. Welcome, Q.
What's up? Who's this? Can you guys hear me? Should use this. Okay, so hopefully this sounds all right. So I'm gonna talk a bit about KNF and what it is and why it's good and how I found it and what it means to me and how it works. And I'm gonna talk a lot about pheno hunting for hash in no-till beds in a small amount of space efficiently for your business. But first, I'm gonna tell you kind of how I got to where I am so you can decide if you care what I have to say or not, because you don't have to. When I was younger, I wrestled for most of my childhood and high school and everything. I was four-year letterman, you know, varsity all 4 years, always had a winning record, wrestled all 4 seasons, very passionate about it. I got a staph infection my junior year of high school, and they gave me the wrong antibiotics. And I had to take a whole regimen of antibiotics, and then I had to go back to the doctor because it wasn't working, and take a whole nother regimen of antibiotics because these bacteria evolve and they become resistant to antibiotics. I was cutting weight at the same time to cut down from like a 150 to 145 pound human to wrestle in a 125 weight class and be very competitive and be able to beat some of the better people and things like that. So that was fun. Basically, my diet was really bad. My diet was very extreme because I was manipulating numbers on a scale and just doing what nutrition I had. That plus the antibiotics. By the end of my junior year, after that staph infection during wrestling season, I was at a school dance, and me and my friends blew like 2 L's of some super fire stuff and went to this dance, and my friends decided to leave, and they dropped my jacket off to like the front desk at the school, and the front desk was like, dude, this jacket reeks. And they just like came and got me, and they were just like, you're suspended, and lost my season, ended up starting to be drug tested and whatnot, had to stop smoking weed. Between the diet, the staph infection, and the antibiotics completely ruining my the microbiome in my gut, and then me turning off my endocannabinoid system by not being allowed to smoke anymore, I was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis that spring as a 17-year-old and had my first colonoscopy. So depending on whether or not I was smoking, which I didn't realize till later, but like if I'm smoking, then it's like, oh, my stomach isn't that bad. And when I wasn't smoking, I'd be like, man, I'd have all these problems, but I didn't make the correlation for a long time because I would just smoke if I could, and if I couldn't smoke, then I just think about being able to smoke. But yeah, so that, then, kind of fast forward, I was traveling, doing the hippie kind of like dead tour, rainbow thing for a while out in Cali, and grew a couple of plants. Like I got a bag of seeds off Haight-Ashbury from my friend and went up in the side of a river outside of Fortuna and scratched the ground and threw some seeds in the ground and grew like, 2 ounces of weed with a friend and nothing. We didn't know what we were doing. But it was fun, and we bought some bubble bags, and we had the 5-gallon bubble bags, and we're making hash in a river in Fortuna with bags of trim we're buying for $20, and had the really bottom of the barrel authentic California experience, in my opinion, and it was a blast. I also was not being super responsible with my choices of psychedelics. I was partaking more often than I should have been, and had a really unfortunate accident where I accidentally consumed a very high volume of LSD. I had a very bad time and ended up leaving California a few months later and had to be committed into the hospital, was diagnosed acute paranoid schizophrenia, bipolar acute paranoid schizophrenia, right? So that's kind of a big word salad, right? It's like indica, indica, sativa, indica, right? It doesn't really mean anything, but it gives you a good understanding that, I have battled with some mental health stuff and come back and have at that point I couldn't smoke weed anymore. Like I needed to get sober. I lived in a halfway house for a year and did that whole thing and went to lots of meetings and they're fun. I like meetings. But basically me and cannabis had to recalibrate our relationship, right? I still loved cannabis. I still loved the culture. I even as a sober person, I've always gone to love tons of music shows and festivals. It's always been something I really liked. Basically me and cannabis, like we built a more, a less consumption-based relationship. I still loved it, but consuming it wasn't the part that I loved. I always wanted to like learn about like why do they have different shapes, and you look at different buds, and before anybody told me calyx and pistils, which aren't even the right words because it's like Braxton stomata or Braxton and yeah. See, I'm still getting all the words mixed up, but I'm learning these different structures, these buds, and paying attention and seeing a lot more weed, and we start getting weed down from Maine and stuff, and I'm like, holy shit, this weed, like I saw a lot of good weed in California, but some of this Maine weed is really exceptional, and I'm in PA at the time or whatever, and so I basically, at the same time, I'm still really sick because now I'm not smoking because I'm, becoming sober, and now my stomach is getting worse. So it's like either I get to smoke weed or, if I'm not smoking weed, then I'm sick, in my guts and stuff. So it's kind of this weird dichotomy I'm always balancing back and forth between. So basically what happened was I was getting really sick, and I ended up having to go get my second colonoscopy as like a maybe 24, 25-year-old. And the doctors, they were just like, yeah, we'll just give you more steroids. Like, cause that's all we can do. And I was like, no, I don't want fucking steroids. Like, leave me alone. I flew out to Colorado, tried to smoke some weed to feel better for a couple weeks while I was out there, and ended up like juicing some cannabis. That was really helpful, trying some different things, but actually ended up finding like some probiotic drinks that really helped. And I started taking these probiotic drinks, and I was like, wow, this is making a huge difference, my quality of life, and slowly started being like, well, what are these, what is a bacillus? And what is a lacto, whatever, like what are these Latin words? What is really working in these probiotic drinks? I started realizing it's living organisms that are working. Like the thing that's helping is more living organisms, more biology being present in my body. So that kind of led me to the Probiotic Farmer Alliance page on Facebook. And that would have been back in like 2016, 2017. I started to run to that page. And people are like making labs, and they're doing, people talking about Elaine Ingham, and they're talking about K&F, and there's a lot of great ideas spilling around. And, I kind of get a couple pieces. I make a lab. I'm like, okay, this is pretty cool. I end up moving to Maine with some buddies, to grow weed on a farm. And, we actually had a terrible falling out, which is par for the course. And I spent the winter in a camper in Maine, like negative 10 degrees every night. I had to wake up in the middle of the night to change the propane tank because it would run out of heat because it's so cold. I'd wake up to like 40-degree weather and gotta go, change the tank so I can sleep the rest of the night. And while I'm doing that, I'm reading one of Master Cho's books, which you can download off of the Probiotic Farmer Alliance page on Facebook. There's a lot of errors because it's translated from Korean, but it was super life-changing to me in that atmosphere, and have taken that step with cannabis. Like, I want you to be my primary income, and I want to do this with you, and then to see that Korean natural farming was the only way I want to do that. That's kind of what happened for me. The nutritional density of food is super important, and is one of the reasons I also thought I was sick. I mean, we're from the generation where we all ate Doritos and fucking Dunkaroos and, just all junk food, right? Like my liver is made out of genetically modified corn, right? Not a good way to build your organs. So I started this book, and it clicked, and I felt that singularity with nature, like, okay, the whole planet's fucking alive. Like, there's really not a bunch of parts of the planet that aren't alive, and you start to realize that you just aren't aware of the fact that everything's alive. And Korean natural farming is a lens that helps you see nature more deeply. So that was it. Then I went and I got a property, and I started building my farm. So Korean natural farming is very important to me. Cannabis is very important to me, and I've never, other than that little bit of weed I grow in Cali, I've always done them together. I've never done one without the other. So to me, they're just one thing, which sometimes makes it hard for me to help other people that grow differently. Because I'm like, well, you should just use these K&F inputs. And then it's like, oh, I forget that not everybody does that, right? But yeah, so that's generally how I got to where I am. And then I'll talk about where I am. So I'm in Maine, I'm in central Maine. I have a 15 lighter that's indoor, and I have a 30 by 70 full-term greenhouse with hugel trenches that I built right after the first regen that Josh taught, which I'll talk a little bit more about. Yeah, let me tell you a little bit more about that. So I move up to this property and I'm growing. I'm using Build-A-Soil, right? I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna do no-till stuff. And I'm like, cool, no-till, I'll buy it from Build-A-Soil. Like, not really getting it. Also not really understanding that I pop 200 seeds. First thing I do is I pop 200 seeds and I buy 36 sips. So I'm running sub-irrigated pots and I'm running everything from seed. And it was pretty wild, pretty messy, learned a lot really fast. But I just thought no-till just meant you didn't do anything. Like, yeah, you just don't fix it. And that's not really how it works. Run into tons of problems. And so actually, right before I went to my first regen conference, I had over-vegged these plants in soil that was just basically just depleted from the previous round. And, I didn't really know how big plants were supposed to be or any of that shit. So I ended up having to take all the plants out of the sip and cut off their roots. So like, imagine like a shoebox. Basically cut off both ends of the shoebox, was left with a block, re-amended that same soil, which was like roots and stuff, and mixed it back in and put the block back in. So I up-potted into the same container, if that makes any sense. I did that, and then I went to a conference like, I don't know, 2 weeks later, and just listening to Elaine Ingham and Steve Reisner and Chris Trump and Leighton Morrison, all these amazing people, and the common denominator amongst all of these styles obviously is regenerativeness, but is biology. Like, biology was the word that got glued in my head. It was an honor to meet Chris Trump. That was like a very starstruck moment for me, and Elaine Ingham as well. Like getting a lasagna recipe from Elaine Ingham herself for a compost was really cool. I drive home, I'm driving home on the highway 80, up north. I got this big drive, and I get home and the snow is definitely where the table is. So I definitely have like 3 feet of snow on the ground at the time, right? It's the middle of winter. It's like February or whatever in Maine. So I put on my snowsuit and I go into the woods with a container, and I start pulling pieces of bark off of frozen trees and looking for not lichen, but physical mycelial webs on pieces of fallen tree bark material sticking out of the snow, off of living trees. I just try to find as much fungal hyphae and biology as I can. I bring it into my indoor grow. I drop a rice box on it. I cultivate an indoor IMO collection. And then I was off to the races. I started making liquid IMOs with that to get me started until I got more collections in the spring to start making IMO 3s and IMO 4s, which, sorry about the acronyms. I'll try to get into that a little bit. But these are boutique composts that are derived from your local region. So sorry for people where this is a bit confusing. But yeah, then that as soon as I started brewing these things and applying them to my plants, the change started. The change was immediate, and for me there was no going back. So biology. I highly recommend that you look at farming as a biological interaction and less as a chemical interaction, because it is chemical, absolutely. We're chemical, absolutely, but biology interacts just really intimately with other biology, and that's what plants want to do. So that's a little bit about kind of how the farm got to actually not just die, because it was not doing good there for a while. So I do the regen class. So that would have been 2019. So that fall, I went to my first K&F class under Chris Trump in Connecticut, and I had already been making IMO 4 and doing stuff and applying liquid IMO, and I was already running a business entirely off of KNF. So when I went to that class, the amount, like the level up was really surprising for me. It's the more you know, the more you can absorb at a setting like that. And it was awesome. I met so many people that are still some of my best friends. Like when you meet somebody else who's literally bonkers about, going in the woods and collecting microbes, you naturally are just pretty good friends. Like you don't have to explain much more, right? If you got this nice rig and you fly all over the country to buy hash and then you meet somebody else who does the same thing, it's like, you don't really need to like see if you like them. There's a pretty good chance they're just dope, right? So you meet friends like that, things really click at these conferences and you start to, like there isn't like a best farmer, right? It's not like, oh, that's the farmer who has all the answers. Like you start making this network of people where it's like, oh, if you have questions about KNF and pears, you ask somebody. But if you have questions about KNF and corn farming, you ask somebody completely different. So you start to build this lateral network of, if you want to know about cows, you ask this person. But if you want to know about KNF chickens, you ask this person. And you start to realize how many resources there are where maybe somebody isn't more experienced than you, but it's the experience type that they have that allows us to all share. So that would have been 2019. My farm got a lot better after getting back from that class. Understanding the nutritive cycle theory and when to apply which things. A core principle of Korean natural farming is the right amount of nutrient at the right time. So you're always trying to use a very little bit, but you're using it with such accuracy at the correct time that you're getting amazing results. So never more than you need to use and always using it at the right time. That's something that is really hard to compete with when you look at bottom lines. It's really hard for other styles of farming to compete with that aren't biological and aren't relying on just life being life, But anyway, so 2020, I go to Boise, which Boise is kind of the big class in Korean natural farming. That would have been where Ross Guy Paul went like a year before me. The big class out in Boise is really cool because a lot of the old students come back. You see these 12-year KNF veterans coming back, things like that. It's really sweet. And that was when you go back for your second class, you're actually teaching. So it's a program where you go back and you're now helping Chris teach. And you now, like I got stuck in a Airbnb with all first years, and then I'm a soil smith, and and I gotta tell them all their bad habits are wrong and set them straight, and they're asking me a million questions and teaming up on me. But those are now all some of my best friends. We had such a good time that first year. Just getting to walk people through some of the stuff and helping them with some of the mistakes and the nuances that is committing to biological farming. It's really intimidating. It's intimidating, but you gotta have some confidence and you gotta have some fun. So that was my first. So after that teaching at that class, I became a soil smith, which a soil smith is anybody that has taken a 5-day class, then practiced that for a year, come back to another 5-day class and helped Chris teach at that 5-day class. So in 2020, I became a soil smith, and I had already been running a fully KNF indoor and full-term cannabis farm. So so indoor KNF is pretty interesting stuff, and I didn't have a lot of guidance, and I definitely put together a lot of systems on my own that honor Korean natural farming and do the best that it can in an indoor setting. It's a lot of change and a lot of difference, and it's a lot of fun. So that kind of brings us up to why you would care what I think about Korean natural farming, and Chris Trump being my teacher. I have other teachers certainly, but I like to learn from one person to learn something completely, but that's just me. I'm kind of intense like that. So now the structure of my farm. So I have a 30 by 70 greenhouse, 15-foot arch in the center. It's a Gothic arch so it can handle snow load in the Northeast. I'm up in central Maine. We get a lot of snow, we get a lot of cold. And I built hugel trenches that are 70 feet long and 3 feet wide, 3 feet deep, right? So I had them dug with an excavator. And then I had a maple tree taken down. I think it was a walnut actually. Walnut tree taken down to put the power line into my indoor grow. So that whole tree got inoculated with liquid IMO, and after 4 months, all the wood is growing mushrooms and is completely inoculated. I took all those logs, put them in the bottom of those trenches, and then started building my hugel trenches on top of those. Then I built my greenhouse on top of that. So that is something that I'm really glad that I had the patience and the hindsight to do that before I put the greenhouse on. It also worked out well financially. It's a lot cheaper to, to put logs in the ground than it is to buy a greenhouse. So it's a good thing to do for baby steps too. So we do all full term, and everything in the greenhouse that's full term goes to hash. That's the way I do it. That's the way I like it. The flower density of outdoor bud can be a little lackluster for people, but most importantly, just in Maine, it is so fucking hard to grow good outdoor uncovered cannabis. It's really tragic how much weed you have to cut out and throw away. So I learned that my first year and quickly was like, I don't ever want to grow plants that aren't covered in my region again. So the way I work with the sun is all my sun grown goes to resin. My indoor is a 15 lighter. And I run beds. I used to run sips, all those sips I was talking about. I built an expansion pot on top of those, ran those for another year, and then I took those no-till pots that I had been running for, I don't know, almost 10 cycles or whatever, and dumped them into beds, and then added more soil. So like what are now maybe 8-cycle no-till beds have 10-cycle no-till pots as the base for the bed, right? So I'm running 3 sets of beds, 2 beds in a set, so 6 beds in total. So I always have a bed in fruit, a bed in flower, and a bed in veg, right? So this stuff's in veg, this stuff's maybe at week 2, this stuff's at week 6, right? So everything is moving. I harvest every month, and I move beds with pallet jacks, and it's fucking terrible. It's absolutely awful. The wheels break off all the time. I'm like, I gotta be on my back with my dreads on the dirt, like trying to screw fucking caster wheels back onto these, giant joist boxes I built to hold these 4x8 beds that all weigh as much as a Honda. But I can move through product really fast. I can up pot from a cloner into a 4-inch pot into a bed. So not a lot of up potting. Up potting is a lot of work. I recommend avoiding it if you can. So that's a general flow. Everything is blue mat, soaker hose. I can talk about some of that stuff. If anybody has questions about kind of infrastructure setup, to me it's all just like mundane, so it's hard for me to think about maybe. I go blue mat because it doesn't use electric. It's a mechanical system, which is just very attractive to me. I like the idea of not having electrical impulses in and around my soil. Like, I don't know what that does. It might be good, it might be bad, but I don't really know. And less failure. The blue mats read the water. So blue mat is a clay carrot that's full of water, and the osmotic pressure of the soil, when it dries out, tries to steal the water out of the carrot. That creates a pressure differential in the carrot that then sends water into the hoses. So the carrot isn't watering the bed, it's the pressure differential that tells the hose to get more or less water, which gives you a real-time reading of just moisture. It's pretty accurate. Yeah, so I really like that. There's certainly a million ways you could do it that are better. It's just getting used to the equipment you choose to use and using it to the best of your abilities. I recently went from the standard soaker kit is like, it's like 20 feet of hose and a 4x8 bed, and it's all right. I had a deep carrot and a shallow carrot, so you're getting like a moisture reading on the bottom of the bed and moisture reading on the top of the bed. I just built a bunch of manifolds, so I have one 4x8 bed that has 4 2x4 blue mat panels in it that all run independently, each on a high carrot and a low carrot. And I just did a prototype on it, and we have one bed, and it's fucking crushing. Microclimating those moisture regions is really nice. The amount of breakdown I'm getting on mulch is insane. Like, I'm able to feed this bed double the amount of carbon material, and I'm just chewing through mulch layers. Like, I dug into this mulch layer before I left, and I was expecting, because I just did this with this new prototype, and it's like, I was expecting it to be like 3 inches of wood shavings like my other beds are, and it was just worm castings. Like it was like literally almost no wood, and I was just like, oh, that's all just turned into fucking worm castings. So I'm getting really good results with these kind of manifolds for the beds. So that's something I really like. Yeah. Any more infrastructural questions? I run California Lightworks. I don't really think the light company matters at all, personally. You can, burn me at the stake later. So I'm super mom and poppy, right? So it's just me, and I have a part-time worker, and then sometimes I have friends like Mike come up and help out, but it's like really low key. It's really just me, and nobody touches shit without me looking at what they're touching. Like things are very heavily overmanaged. So I like it that way. But yeah, so I've got a Bruteless 30 gallon. And and I've got it on a nice little pumper thing, so I can raise it up and drain into my trash cans. And I've got my cool bot, and it's in a spare little bedroom in my house. So nothing fancy. But the cool bot works good. I'm able to get the room down, close to 40 usually. In the winter, I just open the windows because it's Maine. So you're only really using the cool bot in the spring, and I try to not wash in the summer if I can. But I might wash this next run just because now I'm all excited talking to all you guys about hash and shit. So I'm like, well. So anyway, so I run bubble bags, 30 gallon bubble bags, and usually I'm looking for fucking melt. I'm always trying to see if melt is there, even if it is or it isn't. I might not always take it, but I always want to see, what the 120 looks like, what the 90 looks like, what the differences are. I do a lot of paddle testing. So if you take the paddle dabbers that you kind of would use to cold cure or whatever, and you scoop a bunch of melt on that and you kind of hold it at a 45-degree angle and you hit it with a lighter and chase it. If you're doing that with like a 45, that shit's probably gonna light on fire. And if, 25 is definitely gonna light on fire, 45 might kind of grease down and light on fire. And then like, if you have some melt, it should just water down. And then kind of I'm grading my melt based on like, okay, if I can chase this and run this glob of melt like all the way down to my hand on a paddle dabber, then like, holy fuck, this shit is awesome. And then I'm looking at like bands of contaminant that's leaving behind. And that's kind of how I'm analyzing quality of things. So 90, 120, sometimes both. I have had a couple cultivars where I can get both of those to be like a really high end 5.5, kind of star, something nice. So yeah, Bruteless, keep your room cold, lots of fucking ice. I wash very gently at a very questionable methodology. My first wash is like an hour. My second wash is like an hour and change, and then I might need a third wash depending on how big the batch is. Really, really slow. If I can hear the paddle on the first wash, someone is getting yelled at. There is no noise in the first wash. Like I don't want any, I want a frictionless wash vessel. I want no resistance. I want no pushback. I don't want to be really disturbing anything. I'll put my ear on the paddle, and you can move the paddle around with your ear on the paddle and actually just hear how volatile the ice is. And that's how I'm deciding how heavy to wash.
That's somewhat unconventional. Can you explain your reasoning behind that extra long wash and how gentle? Like, what's your reason behind that?
Yeah. So a little bit of the Frenchy cannoli idea of like ripeness, right? If something is really ripe and you go shake a tree, the fruit should fall off the tree without much shaking. The harder you're shaking, you're getting underripe fruit and things like that. And I don't want any plant material. I want to kind of just see, I want percussion of ice. I want the percussion noise. I want to use the vibration of sound to create enough rupturing to knock things off. So I was a mason for 2 years, and when you clean a wheelbarrow in masonry, you smack the crap out of the wheelbarrow with the hammer, and the vibration of the metal knocks all the mortar from the day before out. So you're using percussion to to loosen things. Like you wouldn't bend ice, right? You need to break ice. There's no bend option, right? So we're getting these trichomes cold enough that they're now brittle enough that they're gonna act like ice, and we're gonna snap these to separate them. So I'm not using force. I don't wanna push on things. I want a snappy vibration that is gonna loosen things up. So it could all be fake and made up. I have no data, but that's what I do. It's what keeps me having fun, and that's how I like to approach it, yeah.
I'm just curious about your cut down and freezing process, Pops.
Yeah.
How you prefer that?
Yeah, so I get a 5-gallon bucket. I'll get a few 5-gallon buckets set up, and I'll fill them with a couple inches of water in the bottom, and I'll throw them in the freezer overnight. So now I've got these 5-gallon buckets with the bottom is just a 3-inch block of ice, and then I'm taking a turkey bag and lining that with that. So now you've got a chilled bucket. So as you're bucking into it, you're bucking onto a chilled bag. For time and efficiency, I feel like it's a really happy medium compromise, from a lot of options. I leave that bag open in that bucket. That bucket gets thrown in the freezer for at least 2 hours before it gets closed up. And I try to use one freezer because it just gets covered, and the whole thing is just iced out. And then you have to thaw it out eventually. But so I have like one freezer that's like this is the freezing weed freezer, and then I have a bunch of other chest freezers that are the storage chest freezer, yeah.
Have you ever tried using dry ice in that process?
Where I live, it's like a 40 to 50 minute drive to get dry ice. So the idea of it never seemed like it would be worth the time, but I have a friend that does, yeah.
Yeah, I mean like Southern California, I know some guys that do similar process but use dry ice.
Yeah, if you can get it, I would definitely play with that for sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's just not really accessible for me, but yeah, the colder the better. Don't smear all your trichomes over the side of your bags. Small pieces on the weed. I'll circle cut everything. So every cannabis plant, I think of it as like a radius of resin. So if you're looking down a bud, right? We're looking down a bud, you're gonna have maybe you have a vanilla wafer amount of resin. So it comes out the leaves a little bit. Some buds, you might have like a CD of resin. So that's gonna dictate how much of a radius I might be cutting. Of how much resin I'm leaving to plant material I'm losing, and we're circle cutting everything. I usually circle cut top to bottom, and then I buck down bottom to top. But yeah, always learning. You can always get faster at that kind of stuff, and just taking time and taking care. I hope that helps. So throwing ice in the machine, getting the water really, really fucking cold. Before any weed goes in the machine is one of the biggest things I've messed up, and things that have made big quality improvement. Getting that water below freezing can make a world of difference. So you don't get that chlorophyll and by the end of the run. So I got a peer pressure press. What's up?
A little backtrack on you were saying good vibrations. Have you used any different styles of a machine or something to do a vibrational extraction instead of using your paddle or anything?
So that machine back there is the first time I've ever made hash not in my cold room, and I've never really had any other hash makers up to my cold room. So the way I've developed everything is just pretty independently developed. Obviously, I've learned so much from everybody in the industry, and I listen to all sorts of podcasts just like we all do. But yeah, that's just kind of the only way I've ever really done it. But I'm not huge on machines. I like that machine, but I like the water movement part. I would hand wash and use the water. I don't want to have to pick up barrels of water and shit. That's the part about that machine that I'm whoa.
Being that you have that masonry background, you see some of these machines that are using the same shakers that they're using in your cement work to make a nice flat area, right? They're using that little I don't even know what it's called, the little kind of a belted machine that they put on the side of a barrel, and it just shakes it so it settles your...
Yeah, a tamper style of technology, right, where it's shaking everything. You're gonna get a lot of stratification. It's the biggest thing I see with a lot of wash machines and different things is your weed on the top is your weed on the top, and your weed in the middle is your weed on the middle, and your weed on the bottom is your weed on the bottom. And ice and weed and water all stratify. So you'll have your ice and then your weed and then your water. So I really like to mix up and down. And I don't think any of those vibration only machines are gonna accomplish that. And it's not that you don't want to vibrate the barrel. You want rigid things like ice slamming into each other. For me, that's what I like. That's what Bubble Man talks about. And when I lean into that, I really felt like I noticed a difference. You could certainly put like metal or a higher percussive noise medium in there to use that. But like, it just seems like a little bit trying to invent a wheel that already exists. Like, I don't know. There could be something there, and I look forward to people diving into it. But like, I'm trying to grow really fire weed and like not trying to like build too much shit that isn't what I already got to build. Yeah.
So do you have any like special, other than your gear technique with the paddle, like directional techniques that you're using when you're washing?
Yeah, I like a down and over. So like a down, so you're pulling down and then pushing over. So it would be like pull to push. You get this nice figure 8. That's a really good like second wash, heavier agitation style. But when I first wash, I'm generally just pushing down and that's it. And then I'm moving and then I'm pushing down and then I'm moving and then I'm pushing down and then I'll push down. And once the weed loosens up after the first 10 minutes, I'll push and I'll create space and then I'll move the paddle in that free space that has no ice or no weed in it. So I'll create a frictionless pocket. And in that frictionless pocket, I'll move the paddle to create like a high seas sloshiness amongst the whole barrel.
And on that first wash, do you use time or just feeling?
We'll use a general time, like an album or, like an hour-ish. Yeah, I'll have like, I'll keep an eye on the clock for sure. And I have that nice little lens so you can look at the bottom. And I know I'm always gonna do a second wash, so I'm not super concerned about time that much, I'm usually putting over 2 hours on any batch that I'm running that's like over 2,500 grams or really over 2,000 grams is gonna get like 2 hours of paddle.
And are you doing washes in cycles or are you just doing it as one full wash?
Yeah, I'll do a first wash, a second wash, and sometimes a third wash. I've been trying to get away from my third washes.
I like as the cycle, like do you do like a 5-minute like agitation and then like a break afterwards?
So I put everything in, everything sits for 30 minutes, and then I start, and there's no breaks unless I need something to drink during agitation. Yeah.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah. Cool. That was kind of all over the place. Sorry, I have a pure pressure that I press on. I do all cold press or fresh press. Yeah, everything is like fresh press that I do, not because I think it's like better or anything like that. Just because I don't consume cannabis. So I don't think it makes a lot of sense for me to tell people how to smoke their hash. So I would just rather let you decide what to do with your hash. So I just leave it all fresh press. And if people want to butter it, they can. If they don't, they can't, whatever. Yeah, so also something I want to talk about a little bit is like market insulation. So when you're offering fresh press to the market, it's generally harder to do. Things that are harder to do are harder to scale. And therefore, you have a little more elbow room because there's not as much fresh press on the market. So by leaning into things that are a little tougher to do, you also create a little bit of brand individuality. You're just doing something that's different. And anytime you're doing something that's different, I think that's cool. So it doesn't need to be super market oriented, but anytime you're doing something that's different than the beaten path, you're gonna end up with a product that is just stands off to the side a little bit from other products. And there's a few ways to in a lot of different cannabis avenues you can look at market insulation. So having unique genetics is going to do that for you, and having different growing techniques is going to do that for you a little bit. But cannabis is all about an experience. So people want to grade things. People want to tell things, oh, they're good because I do K&F. My weed's so good because I do K&F. No, your weed is good because it's good. There's no other reason weed is good other than that it's good, right? So just grow good weed and people will experience that. And that is not negotiable. Nobody can take it away from you. Nobody can advertise over you. It doesn't work. Put good things on the market and people will pay attention eventually. So Korean natural farming, was invented by Master Cho. Well, invented, more like put together. He had a lot of dreams. A lot of this stuff would come to him in his dreams, and he had a lot of community in Japan that helped him develop a lot of these things. But he put together this amazing natural farming that was to push back against the huge chemical agricultural industry. They were coming into Korea and they were bulldozing everybody, just like we got bulldozed over. They were pushing this stuff on everybody and pushing anybody out of the way that wasn't conforming, and he was not conforming. And he held on, as along with a lot of other people in Southeastern Asia, they held on to a lot of these ancient farming practices, and rather than us sitting here trying to rediscover them, they never stopped discovering them, right? So they had that like indigenous knowledge. It got uninterrupted. Especially Japan has a lot of amazing farming practices, and that was a really beautiful thing. Chemical agriculture is why we have the Dust Bowl. Things like that is because of desertification, which is the extinction of microbes in your topsoil. When you kill microbes, your soil becomes dirt. Your dirt doesn't hold water, and therefore blows away. All this stuff is amazingly interconnected. The symphony, so Korean natural farming is kind of like about partnering with nature. So you're gonna say, look, nature, I don't know how the jungle works, but I know that it works, and I would like you to come work for me. Like, I want to bring nature into my indoor garden and let nature loose. I'm not trying to manipulate, control. I'm trying to give nature everything it needs for it to do what it does in my indoor room, which is relatively tricky compared to an outdoor room. But that's what Korean natural farming is really about. It's about bringing nature in and being the steward and the butler and having this handshake agreement that says, like, look, nature, I want you to show me how it works. I know I don't know how it works. Come give me a hand. So in Korean natural farming, there's two primary ways that we do that. There maybe three, but I'm just gonna stick to these two for now. So indigenous microorganisms is our biological inoculum. And then you also have this biochemical component that is these foliar inputs that are extremely precise, extremely efficient, and they create this amazing harmony. The IMOs take care of the soil and the baseline, and then you get this accuracy and this fine-tuning detail to read plants and respond in real time to where plants are at, where they're headed, and what they need with these biochemical foliar sprays. So for me, those are the two pillars that I was taught and that I see really holding up the thing that is Korean natural farming. Yeah, so I'm not gonna get too into like what IMOs are. I'm not gonna tell you how to do anything. You should go to a 5-day intensive class with Chris Trump. If you don't, you are just taking shortcuts. I'm about to go to my third one, and I'm like, still like, I'm not even close to getting this shit. There is so much content, but you can certainly go and start learning. It's never to, try stuff, ask people questions, play around. The more you know before you go to a class, the better. But yeah, anyway, so that's kind of like the pillars of Korean natural farming. And now we're gonna talk about why you might like that. Other than the fact that it saves the planet, we'll just act like that's not important, and we'll just go right to the terpene content, right? So when you look at what are terpenes, what are cannabinoids, these are extremely, extremely, extremely complex carbon chains. So in order to build complex carbon chains, you need to have all these building blocks, all these minerals, all these enzymes in the soil breaking down complex carbon chains. So imagine it's like a set of Legos, right? So you've got, I don't know, let's say there's like a branch falls in the forest, right? Now that is all full of complex carbon chains. Now, these fungi, the bacteria will kind of like loosen it up and rot it, but the fungi have the ability to break down. So fungi are just like humans. They're closely related to us than plants, but their digestive system is on the outside. So they go up to something and they're like, oh, I'm just gonna dissolve this. And they'll just digest it exteriorly. And when they're doing that, they're using a bunch of enzymes to break down all the carbon chains into tiny, small pieces that now can be transferred over to the plants. And what's gonna happen is the plant is gonna have a root exudate, so like your armpit sweat, right? The plant is gonna sweat out of its roots in these different ways, with these different sugars, and your microbes are actually gonna read those exudates in real time and say, wow, this lemonade or whatever is really good, but if you had more magnesium, this lemonade would be even better. So now these microbes are gonna go and get the magnesium and bring it over because they know if they give it to the plant is gonna produce a more holistic food source for them. So they're gonna build this connection and this interaction. What you're getting is exact, beyond the ability of us to measure, you're getting exact availability, the exact amount, and in the exact format that the plant wants. And now your plant has all these broken down to the smallest form carbon chains that are available, so just single carbons or whatever. I don't fully understand the chemistry. And now your plant is gonna take those and build terpenes that are as complex or more complex than that starting material that was that branch, right? So you've got organic matter that's gonna end up as organic matter, right? Your terpenes, like that stuff's all nice, organic, good stuff. And your starting material, your branch or whatever, your cow poop, that's the same thing. And the bridge between all this stuff is the plant, its ability to create and manufacture these amazing things, and your fungi's ability to break down these amazing things. So your fungi is like your inverse to your plant. So if you want good terpenes and good cannabinoids and secondary metabolites and all of those things that we love about what's in a trichome, you need to provide these things to your plant so that it can build these things. So that is why you might want KNF, but what I just described, you can reach that with tons and tons of different biological farming techniques. Aquaponics, you could do that with biodynamic compost. You could do that passively by just not messing with land, just getting good land and just keeping it good. There are so many ways to get there, and I'm not telling anybody that Korean natural farming is the best way. It's just the way that I've committed to spending my time and my energy trying to understand fully. So that's a pretty good KNF thing. If anybody has any myths or things they heard about KNF and they would like to ask some questions so we could clear them up, I know there's a lot of talk about it. But yeah, if not, we can talk about genetics.
I'm wondering if you use like traditional, more specifically in your indoor room, if you use traditional soil testing like a Malin 3 and...
I have a microscope. I like to do so I test biologically through using a microscope to check my work.
So you're doing a biological profile, but you're not doing a mineral analysis.
Right, yeah, no, nothing gets sent out. Food sovereignty is very important to me, and farming sovereignty, and I don't really believe in like exporting or importing unless I have to. So a system that's designed for me to rely on somebody outside of the system isn't a good system to me. Let's talk genetics, right? So what I want to talk about is I do 100 seeds constantly. So I'm continuously running a 100 seed pheno hunt that is not for production. So I have two 2x4 beds, right? So I've got a 4x4 of total no-till living soil, beds area that I do 100 seeds in continuously. It doesn't take up that much space. I can do 3, sometimes 4 cycles of that a year, and I'm able to be continuously, perpetually hunting genetics, which sets you apart in the market and all that cool stuff. But really, if you're passionate about weed, you probably want to know what is out there that you haven't seen. And like that hunt and that treasure chest and that what if and that is that flavor oh, I had this candy when I was growing up and they stopped making the candy. Can I get weed to taste like that candy? Like, we don't know. So that stuff's really fun, and it really adds a lot of just content to your life, smelling and for you guys tasting and being intimate with all these new plants that have never existed and probably won't exist unless you grow them, because most cannabis seeds sit in people's freezers. Most cannabis seeds do not get grown, and I want it to be less intimidating for people to grow more seeds and do it in less space and see more phenotypical variety, and all that stuff. So what I'm able to do, and I recommend you guys trying, is so in a 2x4 bed, I'm planting a 4x10 row. So that's maybe like a 3-inch spacing between each plant, and I'm soaking all these seeds in maintenance solution, which is a KNF thing that we can get into later, but you could soak them in a cup of water. If you're like if you're more hydro-y or whatever, you can do hydrogen peroxide in there to keep them clean. You gotta do that for old seeds sometimes, do what you gotta do. And once they sprout tails, just poke holes in a bed and you can just fill all those holes with these seeds, and you're now not up potting hundreds of phenotypes, which takes up a ton of time and a ton of space and a ton of soil, and it leaves a lot of room for failure and leaves a lot of things to be wondered, because you're like, well, was that plant actually better, or did I just mess up the other plant? When they're in the same soil, you're much more certain about, oh no, this is the better fucking plant because they're literally in the same pot. So you're getting a lot more of you're removing a variable from the phenotypic expression checklist, if you will. So that's nice. I do a few different things, but what I'm kind of coming to like is you can sometimes top things, move them into flower, and then just take your clones, kill all your males and take your clones off of your females after they show, and actually just throw them in the cloner and kind of do like a monster cropping style there, and it saves you some time by not having to back up the males if you don't want to, and you can get rid of the herms too, usually in that window, by waiting till day 21. You can usually get rid of 50% of your 20% herm population, which is pretty standard for genetics because of just variability. Like it's important to understand that like somebody might have tested that gear and you might just be growing it in the opposite way. Like I buy archive packs all the time. I love archive packs. He grows in hydro or whatever he grows, and I'm growing no-till, and we're on different sides of the country. Like plants might not be happy about that. And that doesn't mean that that's like the breeder did a bad job. Are there breeders doing bad jobs? Absolutely. And you gotta wade between the two. But if you're not finding herms, I don't think you're trying hard enough, something that I'm sure you guys will all, I know I am still wondering and still asking questions about, is how do you know if a plant is gonna wash, right? When you're doing a pheno hunt and you're doing it for hash, how do you know if it's gonna wash? You don't, but there's some ways that you can usually figure out which plants are gonna do better than others, and you can start to narrow down your selections, which pheno hunting is about killing plants as fast as you can. Get rid of everything. Everything has to go, basically, unless it says otherwise. So it's just process of elimination. Maybe one bad thing, I'll let it stay, but if anything, you get 2 boxes unchecked, you gotta go, right? We're trying to find something that makes our life easier. We're trying to find a plant that wants to grow, a plant that wants to grow old with me, a plant that I can take care of and wants to take care of me, not a plant that wants to make my life difficult, right? So what I like to do is I like to take a box of gloves, and you take a whole box of gloves and you go into your pheno hunt, preferably like after week 7, and you put on a glove, and I like to do 2 at the same time. So you do a left glove and a right glove, and you go up to 2 phenotypes in the same gene pool, and you swipe under a bud on 2 different phenotypes, and you roll your fingers like this, and you smell that while you're rolling it. It's gonna basically take your full melt and break open all those heads, and you're gonna get a full terpene expression, but you're also gonna feel how sandy, tacky, slick that resin is. So if you think of a spectrum from olive oil all the way over to sugar granules, that is kind of the spectrum. And when you you kind of want sugar granules, definitely over olive oil. But if you think about it, these super dry resin is never going to be full melt because it's too damn dry for whatever reason. The cuticle wall is too thick, or the actual grape juice inside is just not that juicy, right? It's like, is it the inside or is it the outside? Both play a role, but what I've found is if you back off, like the best stuff is that stuff that's 1 or 2 notches like more viscous than the sandy stuff. So something where when you rub on your fingers, it's like cold honey and it's got that tacky, wants to stick your fingers together. So if you can get 4 seconds of rolling the sugar before it greases down and then makes it so you can't move your fingers anymore, that's a really nice place to be. So yeah, I hope that helps people find some washers and we can all find some cool new flavors, because there's a lot of stuff that's all kind of the same, and that's cool because we're starting kind of from nowhere and we're working towards finding these washers, but we need to get some of these crazy flavors into the hash side of the gene pool, and it's gonna take all of us to do that. So yeah. Yeah, any questions about resin texture? I personally don't think trichome shape is really that big of a deal as far as pass-fail. Trichome shape starts to become a big deal when you're looking at, is it a 4% or a 5%er? Okay, maybe that helps, but generally I think a lot of us just need pass-fail. We just need something that's over 3%, something that's in the 3, 4, 5 range. As long as it's not under 3, usually you're all right, and it's at least worth having the plant around if you want to grow it sometimes. So yeah, and I'm sure I'll find more, and that's not like this is the only way to do it kind of thing, but it's really helped me. I now have, I think I just broke 10 strains that all make really, really amazing full melt that I hunted all from seed, and it took a really long time to do that, and it's really nice to be able to share those with people. So yeah.
Just full melt. What are your thoughts of like mixing that, that 5%er with like a 4%er, because the terps are so nice on that only that 5 or that 0.5%er, like a 0.5% kind of thing, with that like high percenter, because the terps are so nice.
Yeah.
That you want that strength and
I'm definitely pro people having fun and playing around with stuff. Me personally, on my farm, I would not like that viscosity. So I think of like a cherry limeade or something we all know is really fucking greasy. I think of that as like a paint thinner. And I don't want that solvent in with the rest of my full melt trichomes that are stable, because I bet you that solvent could actually chew through your stable trichome heads and actually like start attacking the cell wall of the other stuff. But it's just a theory. Like I don't know, but I probably wouldn't gamble with it just because I'm not financially well off enough to like just guess.
Withdraws and not hash.
Oh yeah, if you're squishing them together.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've never done that. I've never mixed squished. I've mixed washed some stuff, but I've never mixed squished some things. Yeah, I think that sounds great. Like, and maybe you just want to squish and blend after the fact. Like, I don't know. It's interesting. Yeah, I don't know what the blend. I'm interested to see how the blend game goes. Yeah, I don't know. That sounds cool.
Talk more about the sandy trichome. What would you thought on sandy?
Yeah, so a lot of that stuff is just like you're gonna have lower yields, returns in rosin. You're gonna have a flatter flavor. They're just not. It's basically. So I think of two things. I think of the skin of the grape, and then I think of the filling of the grape when I'm thinking about trichomes. So I'm thinking of like how tough is the skin. Table grapes are much tougher than wine grapes. So if you read about grapes, like table grapes are really tough. Like you need to be able to throw them at a wall. They need to be able to survive transport. But wine grapes are really soft. They'll almost just fall apart in your hands, but they all get fermented immediately, right? So that's okay. And they have more juice because you're not breeding them to have skin. But then imagine, so that's talking about skin, the cell wall, the skin thickness and toughness, which I think is super important. Then you also have the internal part. So, is the inside full of like grape juice that's not that citrusy, or do you have a really sharp, like citrusy, like super bitter grape that's really flavorful more aggressive on the palate. So you've got this filling, and those filling flavors, like terpinolene, generally makes things more viscous, right? So if you've got a trichome that has a really thick wall, but then is full of terpinolene, that terpinolene might actually be aggressive enough of a solvent to dissolve that outer wall, even if the outer wall is thick. So I think when you're getting those sandy trichomes, you're getting a double flat note. So you're like, the wall is thick and the inside is not very viscous, which for some flavors can be okay, but sometimes that might just mean that there isn't much flavor. Like you got a thick orange peel with not a very juicy orange filling, and now, okay, you're getting 6% to hash, but then you're pressing it and it's like, oh cool, we're getting an okay return. I don't really, it's like, almost doesn't matter what your return back is if the hash is mids, it's like, who cares, right?
Mutually exclusive. You feel like yield and like yield.
There's always extenuating circumstances and nothing is permanent in nature, right? But just, those are kind of the two main variables that I think about and look at when analyzing trichomes for me. I don't really care about shape and like that stuff as much. I'm more interested in the filling of the grape than how easy or hard it is to get the grape off the vine. I don't feel like that's as much of an issue for me. Yeah.
Thank you so much, dude. Really appreciate it.
That was awesome.
That was great. That was great. Yo, give it up again for Q. That was fun.